Hi everybody, and welcome to our show. This is From This CornerTV, and I'm your host, Marilyn Dayton. And we've got a very, very interesting show for you, as usual. And but first, I want to ask you a couple of questions. What would you do if you were having fainting spells and your personality was starting to change a little bit? And you went to your doctor referred you to a neurologist, and then that neurologist did tests and said, well, you've got a brain tumor, and because of its location, we can't do anything about it. You've probably got 6 months left to live. Whoa. And then when you survive that, a few years later, you find out you've got breast cancer. But you can't do the treatment for breast cancer because of the radiation treatment you did for the brain tumor. What would you do? Where would you go? Where would you look for help? That's one of the things we're going to be talking about today with our guest. And we're also going to be talking about how she was able to keep a positive attitude through it. And the ups and downs of the emotions. And what a story. When I heard about her story, I said, yeah, I've got to get her on the show because I want to talk to her. I want to learn from her. I want to hear her story. And so will you. And that's what we're going to do right now. We have with us Sandi Gold. Many of you know her. She's from this area. She's an artist, wonderful artist, and an author. New book. Okay, we're going to talk about that. Sandi, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Nice introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, let's start at the beginning with you. You're from Rhode Island.
No, actually, I grew up in, I moved to Groton Long Point when I was 12, so I basically grew up in that area, Connecticut.
But you're from Rhode Island originally?
No, and then I went to Fitch. The reason I moved to Rhode Island is because the studios were cheaper to rent there.
Gotcha.
As an artist, those are important things.
That's true. That's true. Like struggling artists, struggling authors, the old story.
It was a beautiful, beautiful studio I had over there for a number of years.
So, you were from this area. You went to Fitch. And because of your talent with art, you decided to go to, was it Boston University?
That's correct, yes.
So you're a classically trained painter. What does that mean exactly?
That means you studied the human body for 9 hours a week. Your classes started at 8 o'clock in the morning and went until late in the afternoon. I mean, it was like the old school. In fact, at Boston University, just years before I got there, they were still working from cadavers. I mean, it was really an old way of teaching, making sure that you got the basics.
So you decided to become an artist?
I did. Well, actually, and this is sort of ironic, I wanted to be an art therapist in high school, but decided I needed to teach myself to how to paint first. And now much of what I do is going back, the expressive arts is much like art therapy. So I've kind of come full circle.
So art therapy, using art as
is that for healing purposes.
And you ended up using it yourself.
I did, although I am presently employed with hospice, and I'm an expressive art specialist there, using it to improve the quality of the lives of my patients.
Well, let's talk about you as a patient, okay? In your new book, which will be available soon, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, you start with, my story starts when I'm told my life is over. What a way to start the first chapter.
I thought it was a good place to start because my life took such an extreme change, as you said in the introduction. And actually, I was told I had 6 months to a year to live, just to be more specific. And I was told over the telephone.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I was told in a clinic. And I was told while talking on the receptionist telephone while behind glass, and I felt like I had no protection at all.
Oh my God.
I just felt like I was on display.
And all of a sudden, you I'm trying to think what you said your feelings were. You felt vulnerable, and of course scared. I mean, you're going to be. But
actually, at that moment, I refused to feel because I was in public and so vulnerable. Behind glass, where everybody's looking at you coming down the hall. I just shut down at that point. And ironically, my boyfriend was coming out of the elevator to surprise me. At the same time, I'm taking this phone call, and he thinks it's so funny that I'm behind the glass that he's trying to make me laugh. And I'm like giving him the look like, not now. But you know how sometimes they don't always pick up the cues?
No.
And he just kept making faces and making faces until finally he got about 12 feet from where I was, and I went like this. And he just went blanche.
But then he kept asking you, what the doctor say? What'd you say? Tell me what he's...
If I said a word, I knew I was going to fall apart. So I just kept walking, hoping again he'd understand that, you know, I generally don't turn my back on him and say nothing and walk really fast. I was hoping he'd get it. But he was getting upset. He was getting more and more upset, and the more upset he was getting, the more he wanted to know. And the more he wanted to know, the more I shut down.
Yeah.
Until we got into the elevator.
And then the elevator was packed.
It's really funny now when you look back at it, when I look back at it. And I got in the elevator thinking, finally, you know, I'm protected. You know, I don't have to say anything. You know, with all these people in here, I'm protected. And he turned to me and said, now you have to talk to me. Isn't that funny how, you know, we're just coming? And at that point, I lost it. And I just started screaming, you know, that I have an inoperable brain tumor. They want me into a hospital. I don't know why I have to go into a hospital if it's inoperable. But, you know, you can talk to the doctor. He's going to call later this afternoon. Just leave me alone. I want to go home. And the elevator went silent.
Oh, I can imagine.
And everybody was looking in every direction but me. And then when we came to the ground floor and the doors opened, you know how generally people rush to get off the elevator? Mm-hmm. Everybody stood still, and the two of us walked off.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, here you are.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of like a short life sentence, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But now, at that time, they didn't know whether it was cancerous or not cancerous.
Well, they couldn't even do a biopsy because of where it was. It was in the absolute worst place you can have a brain tumor, which is in the pons section, which is on top of your brain stem. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't even do a biopsy without doing more harm than good. So they said, well, you'll either find cancer in another part of your body or you'll die. That's how you'll know.
How wonderful. You know, of
it's
those two
funny
options.
Now. I have to laugh now, but yes, it was pretty absurd.
So now, then you were doing research, correct?
Well, when you have 5 neurologists tell you the exact same thing over and over and over again, and the 5 best I could possibly find, I was in Washington, D.C., so I had access to some really good neurologists. I always get neurologists and neurosurgeons mixed up. Neurologists, when you have them, they just kept telling me the same thing. And then I was in a hospital having tests, and I had just fallen asleep, just finally gotten to sleep when this doctor came in, and it was a teaching hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and he was leading 5 or 6 interns with him. And he was all ready to teach them something, and he grabbed the clipboard at the end of my bed, and he just looked at it, and he went blanche. And he started telling everybody to leave, which again annoyed me. So the poor man, he looked like a good-looking Woody Allen, if you can picture that.
Oh, a good look. I can't.
He's walking, and he has his hand on the doorknob, and I yelled, "Hey, everybody says I'm going to die. What do you think?" Nothing like putting him on the spot. And he just froze, and he stared for a good 20 seconds at least. And he finally turned around and he said, well, actually, you're really very fortunate because this is the decade of the brain. They had just discovered the MRI, and so they really were able to investigate and learn things. And he goes, in a year from now, they may have discovered something that can save your life. And I said, that's so wonderful to hear. Nobody else thinks I'm going to be alive in a year from now. Do you? He says, no. He said, but somebody is doing something at Mass General. I don't know his name. This was before computers, well, before we used computers. He said, but somebody else will know. And through that, I was led up to the man at Mass General. But before I got there, because I was dating an attorney, he was able to do research at the National Institute of Health, and we got the same man's name. So we knew we were onto something.
Oh, good. And that's where you went and met him.
Who pioneered the use of the cyclotron machine for medical purposes. The cyclotron machine was discovered during World War II for defense purposes, so to kill, and this man used it to save lives.
Wow.
7 a week at that point from all around the world. Every Tuesday he beamed 7 people, and I was fortunate to be one of them. And ironically, he was the only person in the world doing it at that time. And ironically, I went and had a tour of the Waterford Cancer Center that Lawrence Memorial recently built. And I'm just, walking around, and all of a sudden I would go around a corner and a woman introduced a cyclotron machine, and I yelled, "Oh my God!" I said I was beamed on one for a brain tumor. It saved my life. And some little old lady in line said, "And I'm so glad that it did, my dear." Which was so sweet.
Oh, wow.
But so now they're all over the place is my point. Yeah.
Now the thing is, even he wasn't sure what type of tumor it was,
because the pons, and as it was explained to me, whereas this is a big part of our brain, but we only use 10% of it. The pons is only about this big, and everything that goes in our brain goes through the pons. So it's like a compact car. So it's very hard to read what is there. And the other thing, it affects you. The cancer cannot touch nothing. I mean, not the cancer, I beg your pardon. The brain tumor has to be touching something. And all the doctors thought I was lying because my symptoms were mostly emotional.
You weren't having pain at this point.
I was not having any pain at all. At all.
But then you started the radiation.
But then we got beamed once. One time. And I was told it was the most sensitive part of the brain to get radiation. I was also told, so at that point, yes, he didn't know whether it was a angioblastoma, which is what the 5 other doctors in Washington, D.C. thought it was. But then he gave it to his his tumor board. Having just had breast cancer, that's been more on my mind, obviously. He showed it to his tumor board, and 3 out of 5 thought it was an arterial venous malformation. But he said, "Sandy, it could have just as easily gone the other way. So you call it whatever you want." Well, I chose to call it a tumor because an arterial venous malformation is actually not a tumor. It's it's where the arterial, everything's all a mess.
Yeah.
And they break down when you're in your 30s, and they generally bleed. And that's when you hear people having aneurysms.
Right.
However, with me, because it was in my pons, I'd be dead in 5 seconds. So I had to walk around for 2 years feeling like there was a time bomb in my head. In addition, the radiation could have encouraged the bleeding even more. And that was a chance I had to take, which I took.
Well, you didn't really have much of a choice, probably at that point in time, I wouldn't think.
One doctor did say, "You may not want to have it. However, chances are very good that you will die from this, and you'll have some unusual symptoms." And of course, that got my curiosity. What's unusual? And he said, "Well, you may not be able to feel." And I didn't know that was even possible for the human body not to be able to feel. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he reached into his pocket and he started jingling the change, and he said, "You wouldn't be able to feel that. You wouldn't be able to feel the change in your pocket." And that was extremely frightening. I couldn't talk about that for a long, long time.
I would imagine.
That was extremely frightening.
Because of the work that you...
That's how I connect with the world. I feel, I couldn't imagine.
But you did have some of that.
Some of what?
Well, you started getting the headaches, the migraines.
Yes. So yes. Yes. And I went back to the Mass General. Unfortunately, my doctor had died at this point, complaining of migraines. My balance was going. I was seeing double, and I was having problems with my arm. And I told him that I thought that I had radiation damage, and the doctor didn't quite laugh in my face, but he said, that's impossible. That happens within the first 2 years. And I said, I have radiation damage, I'm pretty sure. And he took all these tests, and he came back with a very straight face and said, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but you have radiation damage.
Yeah. And it had been about 7 years?
It had been 7, and I was the first in history to have gone that long. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So here you were left-handed, and your left arm was bothering you.
Cramping. I couldn't address an envelope. By the time I got to the town, I couldn't write anymore.
So how were you able to paint?
I taught myself to paint with my right hand.
Wow.
And nobody could tell the difference.
That's amazing.
Because I kept it to myself. Of course, when you're a professional artist, you don't go around advertising that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, it also gave you pain down your spine.
Migraines did, yes. Right down to my toes. Hand, yeah. Yeah.
So here you were in pain, having problems, and really so you were wondering, who do I talk to? Who do I go to?
Holistic stress management counselor, Dr. Lori Layden, who now is overseeing the trauma at Newtown School for the children and families there. I was very blessed to be able to spend years with that woman. And here she's in Newtown helping. I mean, it just warms my heart that they had her. You know, it just makes me feel so much better knowing that she's there.
And she was able to help you.
Oh, goodness, yes.
And then there was Dr. Lillian, too.
Dr. Lillian Poston. What a walking saint she is, yes. I just had lunch with her on Wednesday, and she was all excited because, I mean, she's older than my mother. And she went to renew her license, and the woman couldn't believe it. She didn't need glasses.
And that's amazing.
This is what Lillian does. I mean, she is amazing.
And she said that you've got something like
post-traumatic stress syndrome, which became popular after the Not popular, but the word we became used to after the Vietnam War.
And do you think that the stress that you were under was, number one, because you couldn't drive, you couldn't, you had to depend on other people?
Well, that was primarily when I was under steroids, when I couldn't drive. However, I was very stoic back then, and it's not something I recommend, but no doctor, no family member ever saw me cry. I just refused. That's how I dealt with it. And as both Lori Layden and Dr. Lillian explained, that we need to feel our feelings, or they're going to come out in some other ways. And they did.
They're going to build up inside.
Correct.
That's what they're talking about.
Correct. And what made me realize to the extent, even though I've been working very hard at trying to feel things in my body, and I thought I was doing pretty well, I was listening, and I cannot remember his name now, but a senator was rushed off to the hospital with an AVM. And I was working at my computer, and I heard AVM on the radio, and I collapsed. I fell right into my computer. You know, it's like, oh, my whole body just said, "You're going to give it up now." and that's. I didn't really. I mean, I was able to put it together, but I didn't understand the post-traumatic stress syndrome at that point. And it was Dr. Lillian Poston that introduced me to that concept.
And these two women were able to make a huge difference.
Huge difference. Yes. So loving. I mean, so loving, accepting, gentle, but also nudged really well. You know, gently nudged in their feminine ways. Do you know?
Now, when you first drove up to Dr. Lillian's house, and the person that drove you got out of the car, why did he get out of the car?
I have had a friend, and I won't name him because the story embarrasses him now, but I've known him since I was taller than he. And he tends to be much more conservative than I am. And as his friend, tends to be protective of me, which I appreciate. Mm-hmm. And he offered to drive me to see Dr. Lillian. And halfway there, he said, "So what does this woman do?" And I said, "I really don't know." And he knows that's very unlike me because I do a lot of research. And he goes, "What do you mean you don't know?" And I said, "Well, I'll give you an idea. I got papers in the mail from her, brochures and whatnot.
Brochures, yeah.
And when I opened the envelope, out came angels. Gold angels flew all over. He goes, "Okay." "Okay, I've heard enough." So the plan was that he was going to wait in the car. He had brought a book.
Yeah.
He had brought a book. And he was going to wait while I go into my appointment. Well, we pull up, and Dr. Lillian has a lot of angels in her yard. Signs of peace and love and, that kind of thing. It's a beautiful old farmhouse built in the 1700s in Hope Valley. It's really lovely. And as I got out of the car, he was getting out of the car. And so I kind of looked over, and he came over to me. I said, "What are you doing?" And he came over to me and he whispered, "This woman could be a witch." And Lillian and I laugh about that still to this day. He goes, he's not the first person that has thought that, he said. She told me.
So by this point, you were doing your artwork, your art. Were you doing any teaching, any art therapy or anything else at this point?
Yes. In 1994, 93, I felt as an artist I need to express what it is I had learned and what I'd gone through. And I could feel it in my body. Here I was getting very, focused on my body, and I could feel that there was something I had to do, as many artists have probably shared with you. And I ended up painting a 57-foot mural in the library in Westerly, Rhode Island, and erasing it to express that it's not how long we live our life, it's what we do, and to appreciate every moment that we have. And that got picked up by the Associated Press 4 times, all the local news stations. It was the headline of the Westerly Sun 4 times. It was in People magazine, New York Times. 2020 picked it up. I mean, it just brought people from all over. I think over 10,000 people came to that gallery that month before I erased it. And 2 women came up to me and said, "We're writing a book on expressive arts and we'd love to interview you." I said, "Great, what's expressive arts?" And I studied with them and everybody that ever wrote a book on expressive arts at that time, because I had thought it was something very personal to me. And should I tell the story now or should I wait until the second half?
We're going to show artwork in the second half.
Okay.
But we'll come back to that story, yes.
All right. And then you'll understand how I started doing expressive arts before I even knew that it had a word or that other people were doing it, and why I didn't want to share it with anybody else at that point, because it really became a tether of my life.
Well, there's something else that then happened shortly after that you were diagnosed with breast cancer.
That actually was most recently.
Oh.
There's much more time in between. I was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 1986, December of 86, and breast cancer 2009.
Oh, wow.
Told I needed to get a mastectomy in 2011, and said no, and declined.
Now you had suffered so much from the radiation effects that when they recommended radiation, you said no?
Right, I declined because, yeah. And I said to the doctor, my body doesn't like radiation, and I don't want to take tamoxifen because my body doesn't like medicine. It's just, I'm extremely sensitive, and as you said, I had many side effects. And he said, I think you might want to talk to a counselor. It's funny now. It's so wonderful to be able to laugh about it. But
what did you do instead? I want people to know what we all have options.
And that's the point I really want to make, is a lot of people hear the word cancer and they just become, they'll do anything the doctor tells them to do. But I actually had an advantage in that I had a brain tumor, so I knew to do research. And I also just want to stress that I use conventional medicine, and I'm very happy that there's a cyclotron machine nearby here that can help people. And I never try to talk people out of not using conventional medicine if that is what they're most comfortable with.
Right.
And I did have 2 lumpectomies before I did what I did. So I was going the conventional route. I really believe in integrative medicine, and I think that's really important, because I'm not against, I'm just for the best thing possible for each, and we're individuals, and so only we can choose. So what happened is I did have 2 lumpectomies, and I was told to get radiation and go on tamoxifen, because I had a 23% chance of getting the cancer spreading. And it did. But I still do not regret not having radiation or taking tamoxifen, because when I was told I needed to get a mastectomy, I asked, well, how long do I have to think about it? And the doctor kind of paused at that question, and he goes, I wouldn't be happy if you waited more than a month. It could get dangerous. And so I did, again, I just started telling everybody that I was looking for an alternative. And thankfully a woman named B.J. Gaynor handed me something she had printed out of a book called Cancer Free by Bill Henderson. And his wife had died in what he says is chemo from the effects of cancer, not from cancer itself. And so he was pretty determined to find a way to help people, and has been doing it for a good 20 years now. But I didn't know this. I didn't know anybody ever did this. I didn't know. And that's why I want people to know, and that's why I really appreciate having this opportunity, and why I'm writing the book. And so basically I became a vegan, which means no animal products at all. I started exercising like nobody's business, and took a lot of supplements, and still take a lot of supplements. And that was in June or July I started. July 11th, I believe, is when I started. And in November, I had a mammogram and I had a MRI, because my naturopathic physician wanted me to have it both. And they both came out cancer-free. 5 months.
Wow.
5 months. And I was just so excited, as you can imagine. My conservative friend came over, wanted to see the piece of paper. He left, and he got down the stairs, and he came back upstairs and says, "Can I read that again?" So sweet. And so I couldn't wait to tell the doctor, because I thought, great, then he can share it with with the world. He can help more people. Blah blah blah. Well, naive me. He walked into my appointment, and the first thing he said is, "Why haven't you had your mastectomy?" And I said, "Doctor, have you seen my test?" And evidently he hadn't prepared himself for which is, I understand, they're busy. Mm-hmm. And so he started going through the test, and the expression on his face was like, oh my gosh. And then he looked at me and he goes, "Tests make mistakes." And I really work at being as polite as I possibly can, because why not? Sometimes it's really hard though. But I'm determined, because I had a temper for so long, and so I really check myself. The temper being part of the brain tumor. Right. And so I said to him, he goes, "Well, tests make mistakes." And I said, as sweetly as I possibly could, I said, because 5 neurosurgeons had told me I was going to die, I said, "Doctors do too." He didn't like that. But I never went back.
So before you told us what you did, you said that the breast cancer had spread. Where did it spread to?
Throughout the breast.
Ah, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. But then it was gone, and it's still gone.
I not only had a mammogram, but I had a MRI, and then this is an interesting part too. The conventional medicine was more conservative than what I was doing, because there's a certain test that I do on myself every 8 weeks, and I turn my bathroom into a chemistry lab. I mean, it's a real process, and I send it off to the Philippines, and they tell me my number, and there's a certain number that I needed to get below, and even though the conservative test said I was cancer-free, this other test said no, I was close, but no, I was still. So for about 2 more years, I still worked very hard at getting that number down, and I did. Isn't that interesting?
How did you find out about that?
It's in the book, Bill Henderson's book, Cancer-Free. And it's inexpensive, and I loved having the power to do this myself. Oh, so I was starting to tell you, not only the MRI, but the mammogram, but through Dr. Jamie Lee, whom you introduced me to, I learned about the thermography test, and that came out, not only did it come out cancer-free, but I don't even have cancer in my future. And then she sent me to go get an ultrasound just as a backup. That came out cancer-free. So that's why I just want the whole world to know, and why I'm writing the book.
And you know, that's the thing, sharing the experience, sharing the knowledge that you learn. You know, when you're in treatment for something, knowing what your options are, talking to other people and being open to the possibilities of there being other help. Because I'm with you. You know, I've got medicine, but I've also got organic, you know, minerals and that kind of thing that I take to stay healthy. I'm turning 70 years old in a month, and you know, I want to stay healthy. I want to keep doing this show, you know, and talking with wonderful people like you and hearing your stories, because that's how we learn.
Right, and I think we're meant to do that too.
We are.
We truly are.
We're meant to share and learn. I wrote down Bill Henderson, Cancer-Free. I want to get that book and read it just to be prepared, because you never know. We live in Connecticut. It's the cancer state. What can I say? That's what they say. Anyway. Well, you know, we're going to take a little break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about your work, and we're going to see some of her artwork, which is wonderful. I've got it right here, and you're just going to love it. So we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
Can you help me with this? My new dad teaches me all kinds of stuff.
Sure.
He helps me with homework.
That would be 3.6795.
Thanks.
Yep.
He helps me with my decision making.
I wouldn't use this one. Ever.
And he's even teaching me how to drive.
And that's why cars have bumpers.
I'm learning so much.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are. When some people struggle with their mortgage payments, they become frozen, petrified. Not knowing what to do, they do nothing. But the people who take action are far more likely to get the most positive outcome. Making Home Affordable is a free government program. Call now to talk one-on-one with a housing expert about the options that are right for you. Real help, real answers, right now.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
Up, college is hard. Down, those books are heavy.
My sport is football, but my passion is education. So every year I take promising high schoolers on a college tour to show them that higher education means a brighter future. My name is Nnamdi Asamoah. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
You can be a reader, tutor, or mentor too. Take the pledge at liveunited.org/volunteer.
Do you wear this?
And we're back. I'm sorry. We're talking about the Terry Broder Breast Cancer Foundation, which you've seen people on our show before talking about that. I'm very involved with that organization, and because we're talking about cancer and breast cancer and alternatives to know about, it just kind of came up in our conversation. Because see, you never know what goes on for those 2 minutes that we're off the air and then a break. So we're here with Sandi Gold. Okay, she's an artist, a wonderful artist, and she's now an author. Her book is called The Art of Living. Now, where did that title come from?
I was just catching up with an old friend, and I was letting him know what I was doing and telling him that I was writing a book and just different things and just all the different things happening in my life. And he wrote back and said something like, "You always knew the art of living," or "You always did the art of living well," or something. And I just flipped it right back and said, "I think you just named my book." I've been playing with all sorts of names. They'd come and go, I'd get excited about them for a short period of time, and then, I must have gone through 5 or 6, but as soon as I heard that, I knew that was it. That was it.
And what is your main goal with this book?
There's a lot of different things going on in the book. One of the things I really want to stress, as I spoke before, is that for people to stop and realize they have choices. They don't have to make decisions immediately when they find out that they have a problem. And my suggestion is to start with at least violating. Why not? So, and there's a lot of information out there now, and things are becoming more and more integrated, which thrills me to no end, because we're getting the best from both worlds, and we're starting to work together. And I'm very happy about that. We've come a long way, long way.
Absolutely. And it's a very interesting story.
Thank you. Too. And then the other level that's going on, another thing that's happening is, without trying, it became a study in human nature, because I had so many people wanting to help me and helping me in so many different ways. I began to see, really, I've always believed in how we are individuals, but I really began to see how people really share their love in different ways, as well as what stops that. There were some people that were so frightened, or I made people so uncomfortable. And it really taught me to understand and be as compassionate as I possibly can. Not that I always was. I would get angry at one point, long ago. I would get very hurt, by different things people would do. But that was a small minority, and but I do mention what to do in the book to support people and give examples of what not to do. In as loving way as I possibly can, but just so that we can help and support each other as best we can.
Because that's the most important thing.
I really couldn't have done it.
And you're right, so many people get uncomfortable, and somebody says, "I'm really, really sick, and I may only live 6 months or a year," or something like that. You don't know what to say, you don't know what to do, you want to help, but sometimes you do, you kind of take a step back, or you say the wrong things. You start giving your opinion when you really don't know what you're talking about.
You know who said the most poignant thing on that? Lauren Bacall. She was being interviewed on National Public Radio, and there's a great deal of difference between she and her husband. What is his name?
Well, the first one was Humphrey Bogart.
Humphrey Bogart, that's what I mean. And she was talking about him getting cancer. And the interviewer said, "Well, what was that like?" And she goes, "We never talked about it." And the interviewer said, "You never talked about it?" She goes, "Well, he would talk about going to his doctors and whatnot, but no." She goes, "It's really important." And here she was so young, too. I figured out she was in her 30s when she figured this out. That the sick person takes the lead, and you follow their lead. If they want to talk about it, talk about it. If they want to act like the sun is shining and that's the most important thing, the sun is shining and that's the most important thing. I thought that was, I almost drove off the road when she said that. I was so excited, and that's a quote in my book. I thought that was wonderful. The sick person takes the lead.
That is.
Let them be the guide. Because everybody is different, even the sick people, and how we want to deal with it, and even at different phases, how I wanted to deal with it. As I said, there was times I didn't want to talk about it, and other times I certainly did.
Absolutely. And you're ready now to talk about it with the world, with the book.
And to laugh about it and to giggle is just so much fun. And yes, to share it with the world. And I've learned so much just writing, about what has happened to me and how the whole process. It's been really good.
Writing is very therapeutic.
Absolutely.
And in all instances in life, I found. I've always been a writer, even when I was a kid. Which, I don't remember too much about it, but my mother said I was always writing. I was always in my room writing things down. Heaven only knows where that is right now, all these years later. But now writing a book and then getting it published, it can be kind of an expensive thing. Now, you've had a lot of expenses through the years. So how can someone help you get your book published?
I just started, I just was writing. I've been writing for on and off for 20 years, and I'm very close to the end, And I just innocently, I knew I had to paint the mural. I knew that this book had to be. And so there wasn't any question in my mind that it would be. And then different people started saying, what you had said too about how expensive publishing is. And so I looked up how expensive publishing is, and, it was like gulp, now what do I do? But I really didn't want it to distract me from my writing, but I found that it was, and so I knew I had to come up with a solution, and that's when I discovered a friend of mine had suggested crowdfunding to me. And a lot of people don't know what crowdfunding is, but again, it's about everybody pitching in and helping. Whether people can contribute $5 or contribute as much or as little as they want. And so that's what I've done. I just uploaded my page yesterday to crowdfunder.com and then /Sandi Gold.
And there it is. There's the address right there. Write it down, people.
There it is. And as I said, anything would be very helpful.
And there's another address that we're going to need to put up too, which is Sandi's website. And it's simple and easy to remember because it's her name. It's sandigold.com. Now, on that website, I've taken a look at it. Now, you were interviewed by 2020.
They did a segment.
They
spent days. And for a 12-minute segment, they spent days.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like making a movie,
Right.
But that's up on your website.
That is on my website.
Wonderful.
Yes, Catherine Cryer is the woman who interviewed me.
Yes, I remember that
nice
name.
Woman. And years later, I got a phone call from Better Homes and Gardens editor, and they were doing a story interviewing journalists as far as what story that they covered affected their lives most. And this woman said, most people said war or some, very famous person or something. Or no, they never said a person. She says, and Catherine Cryer said you're the only person and you're not a famous person. So I thought that was really sweet.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Really. She was lovely. She is lovely. But she was good.
And you know what? Your art, you had some trouble with it. We talked about that on the first half because of your left arm getting cramped and being left-handed, and that's where you do your artwork. She mentioned that she taught herself to paint with your right hand.
Because painting really is in the head. It really is. I mean, at least that's what I told myself. But you really have to understand the concept in order to do it. And I think once, because I went to the school that I went to, and it was really ingrained in me so much, and also because I knew I had to do it. I mean, it wasn't really, so if your left hand doesn't work, you just use your right one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's see some of this artwork and hear the stories behind it.
Okay. Let me first start by saying, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor December 4th, 1986, and I went up and met Dr. Kjellberg probably in February, And so then it was a wait before, because there was a waiting list. And so I had an afternoon to myself, and that's when I crashed. Up until that point, it was, just trying to find something to save my life, and finally found him, and then came home, and it hit me. And so I was home alone, and I was thinking about, I was 33 years old, and I was just beating myself up, saying, what have I done with my life? I compared myself to, friends who were, I had a friend who was an attorney, a friend who taught school, all these other, and I was just making marks on paper, I was beating myself up. And then I thought back at the paintings that I had done that year. And I had done a painting of dead carnations. Who paints dead carnations?
Sandi
I did a painting of a woman holding, it was a drawing of a woman holding onto a grave. I did a painting of a fish, dead fish upside down with a rope. And I did a painting, which I will show you in a moment, of my grandmother, whom I'd never met because she died of a brain tumor prior to my birth. Mm. And that was probably the scariest moment of my life, when I realized that death had been following me for the past year. It was just too woo-woo for me, and how some of your listeners may be thinking too. It just scared me. And like the cartoon characters, when they run off the cliff, they go, woo, to back up? Mm-hmm. That's what I did, because I knew tripping out was the expression we used back when, but how I was not in a good place, and I had to go woo, 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 woo. And so I thought, Sandi, would you rather follow 5 neurologists that tell you you're going to die, or would you rather follow whatever this energy, God, higher power, whatever it is, that is obviously has its eye on you? I didn't know what it was, and I remember thinking, well, if I live or die, I just want to, be connected to that as much as I possibly can. 'Cause it was just very comforting to me, and that's why my art became so important to me. But even that story, I didn't even share that with my best friend. It was so scary to me, and because that was my tether, that's what I held on to live. Oh, and so here's my painting. Here's my painting of my grandmother. So just a sepia tone painting.
Now, you said she died of a brain tumor.
She did.
Now, the viewers can't see there's almost a haunting expression on her face. And it's, I have, through the years, I've hired artists to do work for me, in the ad agency business. So I look for certain things, and there's even though it's what do you call it?
Monochrome.
It has depth to it. And you can see the depth on the television, but in person, you not only see the depth, but you feel it.
Oh, thank you.
It's like she's looking at you saying, almost remember me, or something like that.
She helped me a lot throughout my whole brain tumor process. I would pray to her. I would talk to her.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow.
So, she meant a great deal to me. And this she's only about 16 years old in this.
Now, she died before you were born, but she
My mother never even met her. She died when my father was 19, so she probably died in her early 40s.
Wow. And a brain tumor. Mm-hmm. How ironic. Mm-hmm. So you had a connection with her.
And that was the only thing the doctors, they got excited when they found out that there was somebody in my family, because they just couldn't figure anything out. They just couldn't. Yeah. They just couldn't figure anything out. And I learned to appreciate doctors that said, "I don't know," rather than trying to pretend they did. I learned to appreciate just not knowing.
Wow, that's a wonderful piece of art. Just a wonderful piece of art.
Thank you. I actually did a drawing of her as well and gave it to my father for Christmas one year.
Now we have another piece here.
And now this is more. This is of the Mystic Seaport, Reflections in the Water. I just love reflections in water.
Mm-hmm. Now this is, let's see, let's move it over a little bit there.
Oh, there you go.
It's beautiful colors. It's now is this
Oil?
Medium. This is oil. And you work in all mediums, though, don't you?
Well, I used to work a lot in pastel. That was my medium for a long time. But I won't anymore because of the toxins. I mean, other people do, and probably won't bother them. But because I'm with the diet that I need to continue doing, I mean, I'm eating organic foods. I'm not going to go around putting other toxins in my body.
Not.
So I do avoid things like that.
Now, the oil doesn't bother you? No? I know. I've worked with acrylics because I love acrylics because you can use them either as watercolor
yes.
or as an oil effect.
Yes.
And
how do you use it? Do you use them both, or you use them primarily one or the other?
Mostly as an oil look.
Okay.
Because I can do one. I don't have that much time to do it, and I'm going to get back to it.
Good.
Various members of my family have something hanging on the wall from me. But
nice.
But to me, I can fix my mistakes a lot easier with acrylics.
That's important too.
Very important.
Yeah.
But this is reflections on the water, and it looks like. Well, it's the daytime, though, right? But it could be a sunset almost too. I
think it was late afternoon is generally when I like that light.
And Mystic
early morning.
Mystic is a wonderful place. I mean, you can get inspired anywhere around this area.
You look in any direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Now, what was the mural? What was the subject of the mural that you did and then erased?
One of the things I learned to do is I think probably Lori Layden probably taught me to find comfort in myself and how to take care of myself. And one of the things I've always done is to walk in nature and to look at various things. And you know how sometimes you'll be walking alone or even with somebody, and it's almost like something is winking at you or trying to get your attention in some way or going, look at me. The beauty is just, whether it be the light shining through the shimmering leaves or reflecting on the water or something. And sometimes you say something to the person next to you like, look at that. And other times you just kind of let it in. And the mural was made up of 57 different vignettes, and all built upon each other. Yeah, it was different. And then the top was the entire horizon going around Groton Long Point. So you could recognize North Dumpling, you could recognize different things. So it was the water and then that horizon. Yeah.
Wow. I wish I could have seen it. Is there a picture of it anywhere?
Oh, you can see the video. For sure.
Oh, okay.
I did not take any pictures of it because I just wanted to stay pure because I was erasing it. However, many people did, and there are more pictures on my other website. There were more on, but you definitely can see the video. And Polaroid came down one day. These men in suits walked in, and at the time, I was really being my purest self, and they wanted to take a picture of it. They wanted to see, meaning close down the gallery to visitors, and I was being a little protective. And the guy says to me, look it, my boss read your story. I can't go back to him empty-handed. He goes, I can make you a millionaire. He goes, I'll do brochures, I'll do whatever you want. He goes, I can't go back empty-handed, please. So they did. They spent at least an entire day lighting and photographing this digital process, and you literally open up this Polaroid that's about this big, and for people who donated, I opened a fund, a Gold Schellberg fund for people who couldn't afford to have the treatment that I had at Mass General. For people who donated $1,000 or more, they got a framed Polaroid print of my mural. And that was announced on 2020.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I wasn't going to go on 2020. I wasn't going to do the Polaroid, but when I was able to figure it all out, that I can, if I do this, and I can do this, and they can announce it, and then they can get the fund, that it all worked.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a wonderful. I am so glad that you were able to join us today. It's just like,
it's my pleasure.
When I'd met you, it was maybe 3 years ago or something like that. We met in Westerly with Leanne.
We had dinner at Noah's.
We did. We had dinner at Noah's, and I didn't get to know you too well at that point in time. Mm-hmm. But then I've seen you since then.
At the Mermaid.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew that, you know, especially when I heard about the book, and I said, okay, it's time. It's time to hear the story and tell the story. Mm-hmm. And I'm just so grateful.
Thank you.
For you
Thank you for having me. Appreciate
Thank you for
it.
sharing everything. It's wonderful. And I'm going to go on her website and look at that 2020 video. Mm-hmm. It's I'm going to find the time to do that before I leave for Japan. So okay. So remember, Bill Henderson, Cancer Free, that book. It sounds like a really, really good one. One of the things that I always do towards the end of the show is I read some announcements. We've only got one tonight, and it's one that I've talked about before, which is Sophia Sees. SophiaSees.org. Now, this is the Dinner in the Dark, which is going to be happening on November 15th. And it's an evening to benefit Sophia Sees Hope. And they're looking for a cure for blindness. Mm-hmm. And so if you haven't written that down before, write it down now. And you've got a couple of days yet, because this is going to be on the 12th and 13th. So you can still go. And I wanted to tell you that my next show, we're going to be focusing on veterans, and we're going to be focusing on the men and the women in service that keep us free. And it's going to be running on Thanksgiving. So please join us on that show. And I'm just so happy you were able to join us today. And thank you again, Sandy. It was wonderful. And if you know someone that's got a story to tell, or something that's very interesting that you feel would be beneficial to all of us, please send me an email to the bottom of the screen, from this CornerTV @gmail.com. And remember, you can always go to the website and get the list of all of our previous shows. And thank you again for joining us. And we will see you next time on From This Corner TV.
That was